Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I am your host, Jeff Yan. In this episode, you will hear part one of my conversation with Nathan Carpenter from Oberlin College. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Digication's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of Digication Scholars Conversations can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Yan. My guest today is Nathan Carpenter. Nathan Carpenter is the Director of Academic Peer Advising and Coordinator for Strategic Initiatives in the College of Arts and Sciences at Oberlin College. So, welcome, Nathan.
Thanks, Jeff. Happy to be here, and thanks so much for inviting me.
Um, I have had the pleasure of working with you and your colleagues at Oberlin College these last couple of years. Um, I must say that I have been so impressed with um, the couple of programs that I know you oversee, which I'm sure we'll dig into and talk about, um, because I think that it's a it's really the to me a uh, the direction of where many colleges are going, and I think Oberlin in this case is taking on a probably whether knowingly or not a leadership position in leading the pack in that, because you've got a couple of really excellent programs going. Um, but before we dive into the details of that, do you want to talk a little bit about what you do at Oberlin, and so we can get a just a sort of a general sense, and then we'll dive into the programs that you oversee.
Absolutely. Thank you, and thanks for your kind words about our work here at Oberlin. And we have certainly appreciated our partnership with Digication and with you, and it's really allowed us, I think, to um, deepen a lot of the work that we're doing in these areas. So, as you mentioned, I direct academic peer advising programs. And I'm also the coordinator for strategic initiatives. So I have kind of two different hats here at Oberlin. And with the academic peer advising role, I primarily oversee the peer advising leaders PAL program for first year and new students here at Oberlin, and the sophomore opportunities and academic resources SOAR program, and both take a cohort-based model to really helping students transition to Oberlin, learn what it means to live and learn at Oberlin, make the most of the academic advising experience, explore opportunities inside and outside the classroom, move towards declaring a major, towards identifying co-curricular opportunities like internships and research and community-based partnerships. And so I'm happy to get more into the details of those programs as well. But that's kind of the broad model is we use a cohort-based approach that's led by our fabulous team of pals and SOAR leaders. And we've been excited in the last couple of years as our partnership with Digication has grown, that both those programs are now fully integrated with Digication. And we have first years and sophomores in those programs really charting their experience and archiving their work in their digital portfolios, which has been a really exciting thing to see come to fruition.
Exciting, exciting indeed. Now you said that these experiences allow students to experience what it means to be an Oberlin student. So what does it mean? Can you tell me?
I mean, that's a big question, and I think the answer
Mhm.
will be different for any individual student. And we're really lucky here to have an awesome student body with just such a diverse range of interests and passions. And I think from the beginning of the first year, there's a lot about that transition that's new, and really where the PAL program seeks to assist students primarily is through navigating the academic advising and course registration process, and helping students feel like they have the tools from the very beginning of their first semester to make really intentional choices around their academic pathway and the areas that they want to explore. And so, of course, their academic advisor is their primary guide in that respect. And we view the PAL program and the team of PALs, who are the older students, really as the folks who are helping helping new students to know, to really make the most of that experience, to know what questions to ask, to know how to navigate resources at Oberlin. And to make that transition where most folks are coming from a high school environment with maybe 8 academic departments, and coming to Oberlin where we have something in the range of 40. And so understanding what it means to make that transition, and that what was taught in the history department at your high school um, might be taught in the history department at Oberlin, or it might be taught in the sociology department, or even the econ department. And so that's one of the primary ways in which PAL, right from the beginning of the first semester, is thinking about helping students make that transition to Oberlin.
A lot of people talk about, almost like learning to be a college student.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what it sounds like to me, like, um, uh, and I think that there is a great deal of um, sort of leveling the playing field for lots of people. I assume that you probably have first gen college attendees
Hmm.
who are trying to navigate that and what that means, or people who might be coming from a background where access to a college environment isn't as accessible, and therefore may not know the lingos and so on. And I actually still remember clearly there was a actually one of the Digi Scholars conversations I had with a professor from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and his name is Michael Yarbrough, and he said that, as someone who grew up in West Texas, going to college, and even when they were talking about a syllabus, he doesn't know what that really means. They're talking about
Hmm.
credits. What does that really mean? That wasn't a vocabulary in his day to day life, and so I think that starting to think about that experience for all incoming first year students um, could be tremendous, and sort of don't throw them into almost like into the depth of something that they felt like they're going to drown in.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's what we want to make sure we are doing right from the beginning of that first semester, is ensuring a baseline um, among all students, that they know those kind of most fundamental resources that are available to them, and tools that are available, and also know how to um, access them, and pals will be that person for them in a lot of ways, but they'll also be the connector in a lot of ways. And so um, helping to get connected with other offices and departments across campus is a crucial piece of that as well, because really what as you mentioned, really what's happening is you're in a new, and everyone's in a new institution, and
Right.
everyone is learning how to navigate that institution, and each institution will be unique.
Yeah. So how do you find, like what's the impetus to do peer
Hmm.
advising in this case versus, like do like you were saying before, the academic advisor who could be a faculty member or staff member. Why peer?
That's a good question, and I think there's so many reasons why that peer mentorship can be so helpful as a supplement to the really excellent advising that students receive from faculty and staff here at Oberlin. Um, I think it can be really helpful to see someone who was in your shoes not too long ago,
Mhm.
and to know that they they have a real understanding of the holistic experience. They can not only help you register for classes, but they can, tell you what hours the dining hall is open, and they can
Right.
tell you how you can go pick your mail up, and so there's um, really there's a way in which that resource can be holistic. I think that's really exciting.
Yeah.
um, but also the experiences of the pals and of the peer mentors,
Mhm.
having navigated that same transition, which can often be challenging, and can often um, inspire some anxiety in certain ways. I think there's real benefit to being able to connect with someone who can say very concretely, 1 year
Mhm.
ago or 2 years ago, when that
Right.
was me, here was what was helpful for me to do, and here's someone I talked to who helped me, and I can walk you over
Yeah.
to their office.
I love that it's almost like experiential learning, but also experiential teaching and mentoring, you know?
Hmm.
And it does feel like that, um, as experienced and as knowledgeable as your staff and faculty members would be, they also are a little bit further removed from the actual day-to-day experience of a student, such as, like you were saying, when exactly does the dining service end, and what happens if it did end. you know
Hmm.
do you have tricks to still go get food?
Yeah.
um, and what are the best, then the second best choice, and those are the kind of things that, hey, maybe as a staff member or a faculty member, that's not something that you had to deal with, not in the last probably few years.
But
um,
you probably have lots of thoughts from your own undergrad institution,
right.
I'm sure. Yeah.
I know, I'm thinking about that myself just now. Brings back memories, and also brings back why I gained all that weight in freshman. So let me talk to you about the SOAR program. So the
Hmm.
SOAR program stands for Sophomore Opportunities and Academic Resources. Um, I was very, very fortunate to be able to witness a little bit of the SOAR program.
Hmm.
um, I was so impressed by your students. I'm also so impressed by the program. Would you mind breaking it down for us a little bit? Tell us what this means. But I actually also wanted to, if you can, give us a little bit of the background, or maybe the, why and how it gets established the way it has. Because
Hmm.
I think that it is, in fact, one of those programs that, um, many institutions are probably looking for. When you mentioned earlier, students have a lot of interest and different passion, but it's how do you take that and turn it into an educational experience? So why don't you tell us a little bit about the SOAR program?
Hmm. Absolutely. And I'll start by saying that one of the great joys of working at Oberlin is the chance to work with folks who are really eager to adapt and be flexible in order to best meet the needs of the students who we're working with. And I say that because, as you know, the SOAR program has looked really different in the past several years, as we have adapted it, partially as response to what we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic, to really make sure that each year that the needs of that particular sophomore class were being met. And so I'll talk a little bit about the structure in a moment, but you mentioned kind of the backbone of the program, and really what SOAR is fundamentally about is helping students navigate those key moments of sophomore year that that all students encounter. So, for instance, major declaration being a big one. At Oberlin, you have to have declared at least one major by the end of your sophomore year. But what we want to do is really have opportunities for students to intentionally think about what does that decision mean, and in making that decision, um, how can I how can I use making that decision to chart a path through my remaining semesters at Oberlin, both academically, but also thinking about experiential learning, and how can planning my academic pathway guide my thinking about an internship I might want to pursue, or a professor I might want to reach out to about joining their research lab. And so it's really a moment to take a step back and say, okay, you finished your first year, you know what's going on, you know how to navigate Oberlin now. There are some big things on the horizon, and not too far away on the horizon, and we want to take a moment to make sure you're feeling good about that, and that you feel like you have a plan, um, because the snowball effect of planning right now is going to be huge later. It will be so much easier to make the most of opportunities that come your way, even unexpected opportunities, if you take time now to be really intentional about the decisions you're making. And so, in the previous academic year, so in the 2020-21 academic year, Oberlin shifted to a 3 semester model. We're typically a 2 semester school. We shifted to a 3 semester model, which allowed us to be in person through dedensifying campus. But it meant that most juniors were not in classes during the fall semester, and most sophomores were not in classes during the spring. And so what we did with Soar in particular, in realizing that it was important to provide an experience for those sophomores while they were away from campus during that spring semester, we developed um, a month long Soar retreat, for which all sophomores were invited to participate, um, and spent the month together, uh, doing a lot of that planning work, having students think about what we called their river journey. So identifying what are the bends in your river, what are those moments that are really clarifying for you, or that help shape your trajectory through Oberlin. And this was a model that was actually developed by an Oberlin faculty member in the conservatory, Jody Kirchner. And so we did the river journey planning. We grappled with what we called complex problems. So thinking about how can an Oberlin education help set you up to grapple with climate change, and what role does the liberal arts play, and
Mhm.
the experiential learning opportunities that Oberlin play. And we thought a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion in academic spaces as well. And so that was the model for that particular year, and that's what the institution needed. That's what sophomores needed during that year, was an intensive month-long experience that then led into matched, remote, and funded micro internship opportunities, mostly with Oberlin alumni. And so that was the approach we took at that point with SOAR.
Mhm.
And SOAR this year, we've again adapted. So we're back on a typical 2 term model. Everyone is back on campus together at the same time. But over the summer, as we were planning for the academic year, um, we were thinking about how best to position SOAR. And one of the things we were thinking about is, Oberlin provided a really excellent academic experience during that 3 semester year, that first year of COVID. And
Mhm.
so these sophomores who were first years at the time have a really good sense of what it means to be an Oberlin student in the classroom. But where the gaps may have been was around experiential learning, because so much of that was just really not possible due to public health guidelines during their first year, and building social connections within the class. So we developed a new model for SOAR, which had not existed before, which began in the first month of this semester with what we call the Sophomore Reorientation, which was really us at the
Right.
beginning of the semester, right from the get-go, taking a deep dive into experiential learning, and how to connect what you're doing outside the classroom to what you're doing inside of it.
Hmm.
uh, and then also just some social opportunities for folks to hang out and get to know each other and find mutual interests, and develop a sense of connection that way.
Hmm. Yep.
And then the second piece, and I know this is a long-winded answer, but as you can see, we've spent a lot of time thinking about how best to position this particular program. The second piece, which we're in the midst of right now, is a Soar retreat, which is taking place over 2 consecutive Saturday afternoons, and we're focusing this retreat on what we're calling the Sophomore Toolkit, which are 5 things that we're asking each sophomore to develop using a digital portfolio, all stored on a portfolio, that are going to be crucial for their academic and professional success as they continue to plan their path. And so those elements are a bio and about me statement, a collection of personal narratives that can be used in a cover letter or a fellowship application, an academic plan for their remaining semesters, and then a resume and a LinkedIn. And we're spending our time together during the retreat just moving down the list and really spending time thinking about here's how you can be really excellent in putting together a resume. And they're collecting all of that in a digital portfolio.
Hmm. And are they still doing the river journey and the complex problem and all of that too, in addition?
So those elements of telling your story and grappling with the complex problems, we that's kind of becoming part of our experiential learning and career
Mm,
development
okay.
framework
Yeah.
broadly at Oberlin. And
Mhm.
so this is, another joy of getting to work with my colleagues here at Oberlin is, especially during that uh, COVID year. Not
Yep.
that we're not in a COVID year now, but that
The
initial
first
COVID
COVID
year,
year. Yeah.
the first COVID year, we there was so much exciting innovation happening that year in terms
Mhm.
of making it work
Mhm.
academically and co-curricularly, that we're now in the really exciting position of being able to identify, okay, what was the most awesome
Mm,
stuff
yeah.
that we came up with last year, and how can we connect that with the awesome stuff we were already doing, um, to kind of you know
Mhm.
have this best of both worlds scenario. And so we've really been able to,
Yeah.
I think, emerge stronger in terms of our, certainly, our experiential learning programming, which is the piece I work on most directly.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say that what some of the pieces that I am so drawn by with what I had experienced, obviously, a lot more limited, um, is really the timing on when you start to give students sort of exposure to these big problems, these complex
Hmm.
problems, and sort of even dialing that back, the idea of the river journey, I think is very, it's incredibly poetic, like
Hmm.
life does meander, we don't just kind of like we're born and it
Hmm.
goes straight, in a straight road, and you even talked a little bit earlier on this, like I was thinking about this vision of like something snowball. If depending on what you do now, it may
Hmm.
have a big impact later. To me, it almost feels like you're standing on top of a hill, a snowy hill.
Hmm.
Depending on which direction you start to roll the ball, you really are going
Hmm.
to end up in a different place. And I think that what to me is really interesting is, now this happens at Oberlin in the sophomore year. I could see this being happening at different parts of life, really. This
Hmm.
is why
Hmm.
what I'm so excited about. I feel like, like if there's someone in high school, teaching in high school program right now listening to this, maybe sort of figure out your own SOAR program for your students too, because that snowball is going to keep taking on momentum depending on which direction they ended up in. But what you
Hmm.
did, and I just love that because I remember reading about the whole description, was that you got experts in all different areas. You had mentioned climate change. It could be about, sort of diversity, equity, inclusion. It could be about, social justice. It could be about
Hmm.
energy problems, which I guess would be a sort of a subset of, you know, um, climate change. Um, but it could also be about all kinds of other, problems that we face in the world now,
Hmm.
right? From, some of it could be politics based, some of it could be financial, etc. And you expose the students to these f- fundamental problems that will likely impact all of our lives
Hmm.
and the next several generations of people's lives at the minimum.
Hmm.
and and you expose to them that with a great deal of, it's not just exposure that this is happening, but also the academic, research and backing of that. And so the students can have a almost like a very educated sense of, here is the baseline.
Hmm.
And just at the time when they are also trying to figure out, here's my baseline. And
Hmm.
now knowing all of that, I get a much more informed decision on which direction I should start pushing the snowball down the hill. Because if it's going to go east, I'm going to end up on this side of town, and otherwise it's going to be on the other
Hmm.
side, right? And I think that that's a really incredible. I mean, it's incredibly powerful because, you know, on one hand, you talked a lot about the academic majoring and the path of, all of
Hmm.
that, and then getting internships and all of that path. But then on the other hand, I almost feel like it's exactly that pattern of the SOAR program that everyone needs in their lives every once in a while.
Hmm.
It could be that the person's going to be 28 and maybe thinking about marriage and, etc., that they need to do another SOAR like experience for themselves, um, so that they can figure out what paths to take.
Absolutely, and I really love the way you've improved on this snowball
I don't
metaphor
want to say
because
improve. I'm just taking what
no,
you've
it
got. Yeah.
no, absolutely, because one of the things we've been talking with the sophomores about is, to continue on the what you were talking about, you know that planning and that, pushing the snowball down the hill right now and doing all the things you need to do, is something you're doing. So right now you're picking a major, you are deciding what kind of experience you want to pursue this summer. You're making decisions that are right now, which are very concrete and very tangible. And we're going to meet you there and give you the concrete skills that you need to make those decisions. But exactly like you're saying, you're also practicing a skill that you'll use again later. So that's an important balance that we try to maintain in all of these programs. Is, yes, there is the concrete, and it's urgent, and there's a deadline by which you need to pick a major, and we'll help you do that. But let's also, as that's happening, start to develop a reflective practice around how and why you're making that particular decision, so that when the next big decision comes, you don't know what that's going to be yet, but you'll have tools, and you'll have practiced that skill. And so it is definitely exactly like you're saying about this balance between, um, the concrete and what's in front of you, but also the planning for the unplanned.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, isn't that true of everything though, right? And that's almost like the more important skills, because at some point you're gonna get to a point where you go, maybe I regretted part of this path, but that's part of the river journey. That's where you meander.
Hmm.
That's when you go, oh, well, I can bounce over to this side, right?
Exactly.
Um, and um, and I kind of feel like that. So I was very fortunate to have been able to come to one of your events and met some of the students,
Hmm.
and sort of was in a somewhat like almost like a workshop and talking to them. And I was so inspired because the students were, they were able to articulate the type of passion that they have. And I almost feel like that your students almost, they're very well prepared to do meaningful things in the world, meaning that they are aware of these problems, that they have both a emotional and a academic, sort of understanding. So intellectually they get it, but they also emotionally have invested themselves into, hey, look, I'm developing, it's not just a major, it's a passion that, even if it's not a major, I
Hmm.
think that the world needs to be this way, right? So
Hmm.
they kind of have that, which is fantastic, right?
Hmm.
I think we all need that. That's why we get up even during COVID years, right? That we
Absolutely.
want to see the world, like we think that we can do something that can make the world be closer to that vision of where we think is a better version of it will be. And the students kind of do that, but they are informed enough that no matter what major they ended up being, right? It could be going into, some things are like more obvious, right? If you are engineering for, that, you know and you can, work on new battery technologies, that's it's kind of obvious. But it could also be that you are going into becoming um, a writer. It could be that you're becoming a counselor. It could be any of those, other passions that you have. But you can bring that lens of how you see the world and still do that, and pursue a career and a major that may not be so obvious.
Hmm.
And I think that changes the world in significant ways, because we're going to have architects that come out understanding environmental issues and human
Hmm.
rights and how to source ethically, how to build ethically, and there are things that I remember. Was it just this last week that um someone, who was it, that I think it was Pete Buttigieg, that said, our highway systems have been built with a racial bias,
Hmm.
because um, because um, poor, often black neighborhoods would get basically plowed over when
Hmm.
the highway systems were put in place in major cities. They basically just plowed over these, neighborhoods and just yanked them out, and now people were displaced, and whereas the nice neighborhoods were left intact.
Hmm.
But these are things that these are things that are, if you don't think deeply about it, this is what would happen, right? And I think that what you are building is a whole, cohorts of students where they're equipped with that lens, um, in their back pocket, no matter what field they go into.
Absolutely. And you're so spot on about Oberlin students and who are just incredible to work with. It's such a privilege to work with students here because, as you say, um, these are folks who do feel very deeply about making the world a better place. And so, as you mentioned, the experts we brought in for SOAR and gave students the opportunity to hear from them, ask questions. Is really about identifying, you know, what's your slice going to be, and
Mhm.
thinking about these really enormous challenges. One person is not going to tackle all of climate change, but you can build the practice of narrowing down and thinking about, okay, I'm not going to solve all of climate change, but I'm gonna uh, I can think about being in a particular place at a particular time and working with those around me to accomplish something that is in service of that larger goal.
Yeah.
um, and again, that's one of the skills really that we were wanting to help students build through
Yeah.
SOAR and through this complex problem framework that we've used.
This concludes part one of our conversation with Nathan Carpenter from Oberlin College. To hear part two, be sure to subscribe to Digication Scholars Conversations on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Digication Scholars Conversations is brought to you by Digication, a technology platform powering the most innovative ePortfolio programs in K through 12 and higher education. Our website can be found at digication.com. This episode was produced by Drew Albanesius and Jeff Yan. Thanks for listening.